Ever since we had the great financial crisis and the housing crash back in 2008, we have been told that the system has been fixed. They came out with a lot of different protocols during that time frame that were supposed to prevent anything like that from ever happening again. Supposedly all the risky mortgages have been taken out of the system, and now there's more transparency. But behind the scenes, you're starting to see a lot of the same problems that we had back then resurface. Adjustable rate mortgages are back on the rise, and mortgage-backed securities are alive and well. And regulators are now talking about rolling back all the rules that were created during this time frame when millions of people lost their homes. But the difference this time is homes are far more expensive than ever before, and buyers and current homeowners are already being stretched thin. So to be quite frank with you guys, this isn't a new crisis. This is the same crisis that we had in 2008 coming back with just new marketing. That's what's going on right now. Because here's the deal. In 2008, mortgage-backed securities and adjustable rate mortgages were at the heart of the financial crisis, guys. There was too many people that got loans that shouldn't have gotten loans, and all of those loans were packaged up and sold as AAA bonds, and so many people poured into the stock market, and everybody believed that they were investing in highly qualified people's mortgage-backed securities. But if you've ever seen the movie The Big Short, they come down here to Florida and look at these supposed AAA mortgages, and they see abandoned homes and foreclosed properties. And a lot of these problems have gone away up until recently, and now regulators and Wall Street are actively exploring ways to revive all the same old problems. Right now, the SEC is considering rolling back the 2008 safeguards that were put into place. The SEC currently asks for public feedback on whether current regulations are holding back the mortgage-backed security market, and this is signaling that they are open to loosening the disclosure requirements that were put in place after the 2008 housing crash. And consumer advocates are warning that this undermines transparency that was added specifically because these products caused a system collapse before. And today I'm walking in Military Trail Park and the surrounding neighborhood. You also have major banks right now and lobbyist groups lobbying Congress and the SEC in order to loosen regulations. They're arguing that these disclosures are too expensive and impractical, and these same groups that represent these banks, played key roles back in 2008 when everything collapsed and they got a lot of these government bailouts. And then we have adjustable rate mortgages that recently just hit a high that we haven't seen since going back to 2008. And the reason why adjustable rate mortgages are so attractive is because initially they offer lower interest rates. And in a higher interest rate environment, everybody's looking for an edge to save as much as possible on their monthly payment. However, that payment can fluctuate once the initial fixed rate period is over and the adjustments begin. In fact, a lot of people in the past have seen their monthly payments rise by 50% or more when their mortgage rate eventually adjusts. And because housing is so unaffordable, what it does is it pushes buyers to make poor decisions, because a lot of people who are desperate to become homeowners look for different ways to make it a reality without exploring the full set of consequences, and adjustable rate mortgages is the perfect example of that. So you have more people taking on these type of loans just to be able to get their foot in the door of the house, and then they're saying, well, we'll just worry about it later, sort of thing. At the same time, you have banks who are pushing to remove requirements to disclose borrower credit scores, income levels, property risk data, and delinquency risk. And a lot of these experts are arguing that this recreates the problems that we had back in 2008. And I would 100% agree, guys. It's like, well, enough time has passed. Most people have forgotten about all this. And there's a lot of younger people who don't even know what happened back then. So let's just go back to the way things were and get a whole new generation into the same trouble again. That's what it seems like they're trying to do, especially since the housing market is seeing sales numbers at 30-year lows right now. But the reality is a lot of these investors are avoiding the mortgage-backed securities as an investment, not because of overregulation, but because many of them remember what happened back in 2008, and you can get burned investing in these things. There was a lot of fraud that took place back then. You think you're in a rock solid investment. Next thing you know, you have a portfolio of foreclosures on your hand. So unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of the same risky behavior, a lot of the same institutions that caused all the problems that we had back then, and who received a bunch of government-funded bailouts, aka our taxpayer money, are coming back to the table and saying, well, let's just try it all again, and hopefully it works out better this time. And you know, the funny thing is they get the public to agree on this sort of thing because of desperation. Just how you saw New York City, elect a communist mayor for the first time. People get so tired of things being a certain way, they get so tired of the old system that they get desperate and are willing to try something extreme in hopes of changing things, okay? And the same thing gonna happen with this. Too many people are priced out of the housing market, and then all of these old problems come back and are rebranded with better marketing as solutions to all the problems, making it easier to get loans, more down payment assistance programs for more people. I just talked about this the other day. You have tons of programs out there right now offering people who make well over $100K a year assistance to buy a home. I mean, when was that ever a reality? And then if they start loosening up mortgage regulations again and things like that, we are right back to where we started back in 2008, guys. And this is all happening because people want it. People want stuff like this when times are tough. They're like, we're sick and tired of being priced out of the housing market. Yeah, let's have all this stuff happen so I can get my piece of the pie. Not realizing that, not only you're probably screwing yourself over, getting yourself in way over your head when it comes to owning that house, but if there is another collapse in the system, your home's value is going to plummet. You're probably going to be underwater on your mortgage, and it's going to be a really bad economy, much worse than now. You're standing there risking it all. You could be the next one in foreclosure when you lose your job. But as long as I can get the house right now, that's all people care about. And we're already starting to see early signs of this happen right now, because late stage mortgage delinquencies, which is people who are 90 plus days past due, rose 19% year over year, guys. And 90 days past due is clearly a sign of distress. Here's a house for sale right here that they bought back in 2022, which was essentially the peak of the market here in Miami, for $980,000. Then they tried listing it for sale at the end of 2025 for almost $1.4 million. Now they're down $1.285 million and still sitting on the market, guys. I don't know if this house is going to sell. It kind of depends if somebody's desperate enough to pay this price. It looks like they did do some remodeling here. The roof looks new. You got a metal roof, paint, maybe a few different upgrades. But is somebody going to be willing to pay more for this house than what it was worth at the peak of the market? We shall see. So the reason why these late stage delinquencies are a problem is because these are people who clearly cannot afford the mortgage. You don't just miss 3 payments in a row and then automatically just get back on track, guys. This is people who are probably going to lose the house here. And the direction that this is going, the trend, is what's most important, right? The trend is showing us that these numbers continue to rise at a pretty alarming rate. 19% year over year is nothing to sneeze at. The thing is, mortgage delinquencies in general are rising faster than any other type of consumer debt right now, even more than credit cards and auto loans, which I find interesting because you would think the house would be one of the last things people would stop paying. Pretty much the car and the house, because people need the car to get to and from work, pick up kids from school, etc. And obviously the house you need as a place to live. So the fact that the delinquencies on homes are now higher than those other sources of debt is definitely a warning sign. Right now there is a little over 87 million mortgages in America, so even a small percentage increase can be like 1.5 million delinquent mortgages, just like that. And then of course, when people actually do default, it cascades into banks, and also insurance companies and investors. Everybody gets hit by this, just like we talked about at the beginning of this video. It is a chain reaction, especially when you see large-scale defaults happening in mass. And a lot of this is related to the ongoing costs of owning a home, as well as how much these costs have gone up. Average homeowners have seen their everyday costs of owning a home rise 25% or more since 2020, which I think is a very conservative estimate. And insurance costs are up well over 30% during that same time frame. Also, you got property taxes rising. And all while that's going on, all while the delinquencies are already on the rise, this is when they're like, yep, let's start deregulating things again. Let's start making it easier for more people to qualify who really wouldn't be able to qualify. This is going to be the answer to all of our housing market issues. I mean, you see where this is going, right? We're basically right back into a situation where it's kind of the perfect storm all over again, guys. You already have delinquencies on the rise. You have the worst job market that we have seen since 2003, and delinquencies and home affordability heavily relies on the job market for obvious reasons. We have the AI bubble that's happening right now that's also helping to further destroy the job market. We have the tariff situation going on right now. We have banks that are fighting to get looser regulations. This is all laying out the foundation for yet another 2008 style crisis. And I think this time it could actually be worse because our entire economy is just on much shakier ground. People are already stretched to the max. And all these people who are taking on mortgages right now are just not thinking about the ongoing cost of owning the home, guys. A lot of buyers underestimate the fact that the annual maintenance on the home is going to be anywhere between 1% to 2% of the home's purchase price per year. Then, of course, you have insurance and property tax hikes, emergency repairs, and people just aren't leaving enough room in the budget to take care of all these things when they arise. Not if, but when. In fact, one of my viewers, John, he wrote me an email regarding my video the other day when I was covering a little bit of this and said, you know, there should be more transparency when it comes to the future costs of owning a home. Because like, for example, when you go and look at any listing on Zillow or Redfin right now, and it shows you the estimated monthly mortgage payment, sometimes it can be based on what the current owner is paying in property taxes. Other times it is based on what you might potentially be paying in property taxes and insurance. So those estimates can be quite different and wrong sometimes. So that's an issue, first of all. So there's not a whole lot of uniformity or transparency when it comes to what those additional expenses could be once you become the owner of the house. So then the issue, of course, becomes buyers don't get the full picture of what the real cost of owning the home is going to be until it's too late, once you've already bought the house. Those are just the recurring expenses that we're talking about. That's not even including any of the surprise expenses or the ongoing monthly maintenance costs of the house, guys. So I think too many buyers, and I agree with John on this 100%, there should be more transparency in what it costs to own the home. You know, maybe an average yearly expense report from the seller of all the different things they had to put into the house. You know, well, I needed a new front door. We needed a new roof. We needed to fix the garage door opener. All this and that, right? All these things that came up, for example, throughout the years. You know, what did all that cost on average per year? Because that's an extra expense that you're going to have too, combined with all of the expected expenses, the monthly recurring expenses. If there were more transparency with what those expenses were, I think you would see even more buyers back away from buying a home if they knew what the true cost was really going to be before becoming the owner. And this is why so many people who bought over the past 5 years have some level of buyer's remorse, guys. Here's the latest story I found, okay? Here's a couple who bought in 2020 and they got a 2.75% mortgage rate. And right off the bat, anybody who hears that is like, oh, never sell that house, keep that forever, pay off that mortgage, right? When they bought the house, it checked off some of their boxes, right? They had a perfect location, the views were beautiful from the house, it fit their lifestyle. But now, fast forward 5 or 6 years later, they're like, maybe this wasn't the perfect buy after all. Because now they also feel trapped due to having such a low mortgage rate and of course a lower purchase price back in 2020. Even if they were to buy a similarly priced home today, the difference between the interest cost alone is enormous, okay? And that math makes moving feel financially impossible. And it's like, yeah, it's a beautiful, charming, historic home, but it comes with dozens of stairs just to enter the house. You know, you have like 3 levels inside the house. So you have to walk upstairs to get in the house. You have to walk upstairs while you're inside the house. And there's no driveway or private parking. So you're constantly parking on the street, hauling all of your crap up those stairs every time you got to go grocery shopping or whatever. Huge hassle. How you wouldn't foresee that before buying the place, I have no idea. But hey, people make dumb decisions, right? They say the stairs aren't just becoming a problem for them, but when older family members visit, you know, it's hard for them to come over and get up all these stairs, and they're worried about when they get older, how it's going to be up and down all these stairs. And they're saying this home just isn't going to be a good fit for their forever home. And it's like, yeah, you didn't know that 5 years ago? I mean, I think people just get so drunk with the price and the interest rates, especially back then. It seems almost like too good of a deal to pass up, right? Almost feel like the reason so many people bought back then is because for a little while there, it probably was cheaper to buy than rent. I know that was my situation when I bought. And when it's that cheap, it's almost like, how do you not buy, right? It just seems to be too good of a deal to pass up, and it makes you overlook a lot of these negatives with any given property. They're also saying that the maintenance costs are adding up, especially since the property is on a steep grade. You know, the yard maintenance is a problem. It's expensive to maintain because of the grade of the property. You know, they paid $11,000 just to make the yard safer to maintain for the gardeners. That's one example right there of a hidden cost of owning the home that people just don't think about. You know, you get blinded by the deal and the low interest rate, and you forget about stuff like that can come up. But they're saying, well, you know, the problem isn't even the house, it's really about the market, you know, because right now there's no flexibility in the housing market. People are locked in because of the low interest rates like us, and they're living in homes that no longer fit their needs, and they're afraid to move because their payment's going to go up substantially. It's like, who would have saw that coming? Nobody was talking about that on YouTube back then, right? This is all just one big surprise. And I think that's the situation for a lot of people who bought over the past 5 years, guys. You have a handful of people out there that just thought this is too good of a deal to pass up. Let's just do it and worry about it later, like these people did. And then you have other people that are getting completely blindsided by how much it actually costs to own that home and maintain it over time. That has gotten out of reach and out of control. But little by little, many of these sellers are starting to come to market, because if you can't afford the property no more, it doesn't matter what you paid for it or what your interest rate is. That just is irrelevant at this point. So you have to sell, right? And if a property no longer fits your lifestyle needs, you are forced, you know, staying in a house that you don't like anymore and being kind of miserable, or just biting the bullet and selling it and hoping you're going to be able to afford the next house. Or, oh my God, how horrible this would be, maybe downgraded to becoming a renter. You know, you should be ashamed of yourself. So these people are saying, well, we don't hate the house. We just hate the fact that we don't really have any options right now in order to be able to move. And this feeling of being trapped just kind of sucks. And it's like, okay, think about it like this, guys. When you go to buy a home, you should be looking at it as a somewhat permanent choice. Obviously, most people don't stay in the house forever, but when you buy, it is good advice to imagine, I'm going to be living in this place for at least the next 5 to 10 years minimum. Okay, they bought in 2020, it's 2026, so technically they did their time, right? It's been 5 years. But that's definitely on the short end of things. And the things that they're complaining about and the problems with this home all could have easily been predicted beforehand. Like having all the stairs and having the property on a steep grade and things like that, and no parking. You knew about that when you bought the house. You can already kind of do a little bit of envisioning of the future of what it's going to be like living in that house. It doesn't take a genius to be able to do that. And the reason I know that people made these poor purchase decisions based on the market conditions at the time, like it just being too good of a deal to pass up, is because think about it like this. If these same people were to look at that same house today, fast forward to today's prices and interest rates, do you think they would have bought the house? Probably not, is my guess. They probably would have done a lot more soul searching and contemplating of what the lifestyle would be in this home before making the purchase, because the financial commitment is so much higher. Not only does the higher financial commitment make you really scrutinize the purchase more, but it also makes you come to terms with reality more, right? Because the less skin in the game you have with any sort of investment or deal, naturally, it's going to be easier to opt in when it seems like the risk is low. You don't have as much to lose, or the deal just seems great. And here's one example from the past of a too good to be true deal. One of my viewers sent me this story about an elderly couple in Massachusetts that were about to be evicted from their home and lose it in foreclosure because back in 2008, they took on what's called a pick-a-payment mortgage. Back in 2006, they took a pick-a-pay mortgage with World Savings Bank. And basically, they were allowed to pick their payment amount that they wanted to pay every single month. But what they didn't know when they took on this payment was that the interest would continue to add up, and pretty soon they would owe more on the house than they could afford to pay. And this is a great example of how they're trying to make a return of things like this, guys, because this was an insane product at the time. It allowed people to get into homes who were not really financially able to get into the home. It would be big profits for the lenders, high foreclosure risk for the borrower. Now, World Savings Bank is no more, just like many of the other lenders that went bust back then. They ended up merging with Wachovia, and Wachovia ended up becoming part of Wells Fargo down the road. So this couple contacted the local news there in Massachusetts, and then the news got involved, made the story very public. It doesn't exactly say how they got them out of this mess, but essentially it says that they were able to get the whole situation resolved, and fast forward to now, they're not going to be losing the home, probably because, Wells Fargo just doesn't want the bad publicity or anything like that. So the fact that they were able to get off the hook from this is kind of amazing, but probably isn't a very common story. But what it is, it's an excellent reminder of what's to come, guys, because this is exactly the type of shenanigans they're trying to reintroduce into the housing market so more people can continue buying homes who don't really qualify. As soon as you start seeing things like this, again, pick your payment mortgage, when you see a return of that anywhere in any kind of advertisement, it's game over. And to me, it's already game over because we already see things like 0% down again, no down payments, getting in to buy homes if you only have a 520 credit score, special programs for people who make, 80% or less of the area's local median income. Even if you make a lot of money, even if you make over 100K, we have special programs for you too. So I think all of that stuff really spells the end. And once you see the writing on the wall like this, it's just a matter of time before we start seeing a lot of these problems all over again. And even with all the government intervention in the world, I'm not really sure if they can save us this time around, guys, because they've kind of spent all of their ammunition. They've already pulled all the levers when it comes to interest rates and printing money, different things like that. They don't really have any levers left to pull to bail us out this time around, unlike what happened in 2008. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.